for your board. Here's for your board. And
So-
here's for the election board.
There's only one difference between the two items. The board has to approve this list of names.
Yeah, so there's only one action item under the board that needs to be done. The rest is just discussion.
Well, and approval of the minutes.
Well, approval of the minutes for each one, that's correct.
So do we do it before the rest? Or do you wanna-
Yeah, we can do it. Well, we're gonna get all our voting out of the way
Okay.
first.
Awesome.
Let me think about this. I'm going to call to order the Tarrant County Election Commission.
I'm going to call to order the Tarrant County Elections Board.
And the first thing I'm gonna do is ask if you were okay with getting this by electronic.
I am.
Okay. And that works for my meeting. And I guess, does he have to do that for his meeting too? Okay, since it's his meeting. And so I will ask for the approval of the minutes of our April 16th Election Commission meeting.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes for the Election Commission minutes, April 16, 2018 meeting.
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Then I'll go through my first item of approving the July 5th meeting minutes for the Tarrant County Elections Board.
I'll make a motion for approval.
And I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Okay, so the Tarrant County Elections Board has one item up for vote. It is the approval per 87.002 and 87.027 of the Elections Code of the appointment of the members of the Early Voting Ballot Board and Signature Verification Committee recommended by the Tarrant County Libertarian Party. Last time we met in July, we approved the members from the Republican and the Democratic Party. And we had pending received these names from the Libertarian Party. They came in, and this is our last meeting before the November 6th election, so the item is to approve this list.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Appointments are approved then. Would you like me to carry on? Or?
Yes, now
Now
you
we go to
can,
the
now
joint-
the agendas are identical, except that we have we have questions and comments, so go ahead.
Okay, so the agenda we have in common, both parties, is for discussing the types of voting equipment that can be procured by the county and the creation of a CAC committee, a Citizens Advisory Committee, for moving forward in the possible implementation of vote centers. They will be the same for the both bodies. I will step down. Can I do this from here? I can't, right? Okay, I'll step down so I can do the presentation and types of voting equipment. Okay, so I'm going to present this to the two bodies as the elections administrator, sharing the research we've done on types of equipment that can be procured by Tarrant County. As we've talked in the past, the county has set aside the funds to procure new equipment, upgrade our current technology, which is already 12 years old. It's actually the oldest of that kind in the state of Texas right now. So after exploring and trying to understand the market, we came to the conclusion as elections administrator that these are the two options that I would like to get input from. And the idea is also to get a debate going on around these options. So the first one is what's called a DRE, a direct recording electronic. A direct recording electronic is the same kind of technology that we use on early voting right now, in which a voter uses an electronic device, a touchscreen, to choose options. So when the voter comes into the polling place, they'll find this device that will be activated with their ballot and their races that they are entitled to vote on. They will choose their options on the screen. So for every race, they'll mark by pressing on the device. Those options are recorded into the database in the device, and the device does not generate any kind of output, paper trail or anything. All the recording of the options, all the counting is done electronically within the memory device's the memory storage devices of the voting machine. A common analogy to describe this is to an ATM. You go on an ATM, you choose your options, the transaction is carried out, executed, and sometimes you get a receipt, sometimes you choose not to, but whether you get it or not, it's done. It's over the moment you commit that transaction in the device. If you want to do a second transaction, you would have to do it, you pretty much have to insert your card again and start from scratch. So what are some of the advantages of this type of technology? Of course, no handling of paper stock, no paper ballots. We wouldn't have to buy hundreds of thousands of paper ballots and inventory them and track them and balance them at the end of the election night. There's no variation in recounts, and this is one of the most important parts of this discussion for me. The type of voting technology we use right now is based on hand-marked ballots. So you get a blank ballot, you take a pencil, a marker, a pen, and you mark by hand the options, and then you insert them into a device that interprets those marks and says, well, if you made a mark on this part of the ballot, that's a vote for Hyder. If you did it here, that's a vote for Anna, and so on. And depending on how you make those marks, you may have a device not interpret your intent correctly. So if you write on the ballot Hyder instead of shading the oval next to Hyder, the intent is clear, the device will not understand it. It won't count the vote for Hyder. With this kind of technology, you have no variation in the recounts because it's electronically already recording what's on the screen. There's no interpretation of a paper that's passing by a camera, which is in essence what we have now. They're easier to maintain because you don't have paper moving, you don't have rollers, moving parts. Curbside voting is easy. We actually do that right now. You literally take off the screen in some of them and walk out to the curb, give it to the person in the car. They vote, and because you don't have to deal with a paper trail, it's already recorded, you bring it back, lay it back on the base of the device and carry on with the process. Some of the disadvantages that are commonly discussed with this technology, there's no second chance voting, and I put that in quotes because if you actually ask the Elections Assistance Commission, the EAC, or the state, they'll tell you that the certification verifies that it has second chance because you can correct options as you choose them on the screen. But if you ask a voter, usually what they'll say is the perception is once it's over, like the ATM. So you can't go back and correct something after you feel that you've finished. And that's important to keep in mind for the next one we're going to see. And depending on how long the ballot is and how many options you have, scrolling through pages of contests and option can be not so intuitive as a paper ballot that we have right now. That's what the DRE is. Option number 2 is what is called a hybrid. The hybrid is a mix, hence the name, of some of the processes you do right now with scanning a ballot and the interface you use of the electronic. So the way it works is the voter comes in, very similar fashion, finds a touchscreen device in which everything is selected on the screen, but unlike the other one where those options were recorded into the database, this one actually prints out everything you chose on the screen into a paper trail, and it hasn't been counted yet. So as a voter, you have the opportunity to look at that paper and say, yep, that's Hyder, that's what I wanted to vote for. And then, or if you're not in disagreement with it, you can go back and correct it, print a new paper trail out. We have to regulate that process. But ultimately, the point is, it counts when you put it into a scanner. So you go on the screen, choose what you like, get a printout, verify that that printout actually has what you chose, and then you turn around and put it in the scanner, and that's when it gets counted. For those of you who like to travel, this is an analogy of it. The kiosks in airports. Nowadays, you walk in, you choose all your options on the screen, the seat you want to sit in, the upgrades you want, you get a boarding pass printed. If you realize you don't like that seat, usually tear it up, go back on the device, choose what you want. And it's only when you actually get on the plane and the gate, when they scan it, that the system will say, all right, Hyder boarded the plane. So it's the same concept on this. Some of the advantages, I wrote slim to none chance of variation just to keep that statistical possibility because it still is a paper running under a scanner, but because the mark is not handmade, basically the only chance you have now depends on how the vendor did it. If they read a barcode, if you drop the paper, step on it, and it gets damaged of some sort. Most of those should be able to be detected anyway, but still, I don't want to be as strong on the no chance of variation on a paper going into a scanner. There is a potential for second chance voting. We still have to figure out with the SOS and have the discussion if that's something that is allowed by law and that we want to regulate, that you get a printout, and then if you wanted to correct it, how do you dispose of it? How do you balance it? How do you spoil it? How do you make sure nobody's getting two papers to scan? But regardless of how it would be regulated, you have the potential to have that printout and say, that's not what I wanted to vote, let me go correct it and get a printout with the options I did want to vote for. All voting experiences are uniform, and the model we have right now, you vote electronic or you vote on paper. So, voters could say, it's kind of more difficult on this device than on the other one. In the hybrid, you end up, everybody, even with the paper trail, you all go in through the touchscreen device. So everybody gets the same experience on how they do it. And some of these technologies, we have to see what's available out there, even provide for using the same device for people with disabilities, people who are blind, people who have difficulties, to generate the paper trail. So their experience in the end, which they don't have right now, and the model we have, they vote electronically, they don't get that paper trail, is the same as someone who would vote on paper. So it starts making the experience uniform for everybody. Disadvantages, you still have to manage even a small but paper stock, blank papers. So you would give the polling place or the location 1,000 sheets, 500 people voted, you would still want to count for 500 that came back. And obviously, because you have that second element of the scanner post the DRE, we will have a bigger inventory to maintain in a bit of more complex operation. Some additional notes when we did this study on what's out there. There's a third option that I did not list here. It's called a ballot on demand. It's actually what Denton County uses. It's based on generating on the fly in the polling place the paper ballot we use now, which would be hand marked. And so the reason I didn't list it, again, I think I've been pretty clear on, I think that moving towards machine marked or ballots, if we want a paper trail, is the best option for preserving the integrity of the vote. There is no, oh, the scanner didn't read this, therefore it never counted. Besides that, that wouldn't allow the county to go to vote centers if we wanted to go in the future. Other than that, both options fit the budget we have available. Both options work with the electronic poll books we acquired this year and that we are deploying in the near future. And again, in summary, in either case, with these two options, we're moving away from hand-marked ballots, which is, I think, as an EA, my main recommendation for the county. Hand-marked ballots are prone to errors that are only discovered in a recount if somebody triggers it and somebody pays for it. Otherwise, they're just never seen. And that is what I have on.
Okay, go back to that last slide for just a second. Let me
Yes,
be
sir.
sure I understand something. That first point, the third option not listed is ballot on demand. You're saying that under that situation, it would produce a paper ballot that somebody would have to hand mark,
Correct.
and then it would be slipped into the machine.
Into a
and counted,
scanner. Correct.
as opposed to one that's generated by the equipment. Why would that not allow, why would the ballot on demand not allow for us to go to vote centers?
The short answer to that is state law says to go to vote centers, you have to have DRE.
That's all we need to know. Because the state, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, says
Correct.
the only way you go to vote centers is DRE.
As if you have a DRE. I can give you my reasoning on why I think they wrote it, but it's written.
Okay.
But it could be changed.
Yeah.
But even if it were, then again, we go to, do we prefer hand-marked ballots? And one thing that is important to clarify, we would still be dealing with hand-marked ballots because people who vote absentee by mail ballots would still be mailed a paper ballot, hand-mark it, and mail it back. We're just reducing the number of hand-marked ballots that we have to handle and the possible variation we may find in a recount by
How
doing
many
so.
mail ballots did we send out?
We have, right now we are mailing out 27,000. That's all the annual applications we have, and we're getting more and more applications coming in every day. So
Okay.
it's a big number. In March, I think we counted 12,000 ballots by now.
Okay.
So that's what we have on types of equipment. Do we want to have the discussion or talk about vote centers and then have a
Let's
big?
talk, I mean, let's see if we've got questions about
DREs, with that said, security is going to be security on those machines and so forth like that, as far as access of people hacking in and all that. What do we say about that?
I mean, either solution that you get, you don't just go out and buy whatever is available. You have to buy from a list of certified equipment and vendors that the state puts out, and those go through federal testing, state testing. So by the time they get to us, they've been through a lot of evaluations in terms of security. Still, that's one of the considerations we would include in procuring the equipment and have the IT team involved in at least giving an opinion on it.
Sure.
The other thing that's important is that when you buy equipment for elections, you'll get usually a documentation packet that says these are the policies under which this equipment has been tested. So it says, it works and we guarantee, and you have the best practices, the best way to use the equipment to enhance those possibilities and those security measures that come with it is to use them following these guidelines and procedures. And that includes everything that you need to do from an IT perspective, create these keys, encrypt this here, and everything that you do from a procedural point. Make sure you use numbered seals, make sure that the room where you store this is locked and access control, etc. So it's a very thorough description.
Gotcha. In looking at the broadness of all this and all over the state and all over the country, is you and your staff have a recommendation on which one of those?
They don't want to make a recommendation.
I was trying to phrase it the right way. I see that both will get the job done. I think it's a matter of asking the community, do we see one that fits the county better?
So
That was part of the discussion we had with the court a week ago. I'm sorry to interrupt on this same presentation.
Nope, I'll withdraw the question.
So how many counties in Texas are using DRE right now?
I don't have a number.
Are people using it?
Yes. You will find plenty of counties who use DREs and counties who are getting on hybrid system also.
And how long has DRE in Texas been around? What, if you just kind of looked at all the counties,
There have been-
had it 5 years, 6 years?
DREs have been around since 2002, since the HAVA thing. I mean, it's one of the first versions that came out. A lot of scanners and a lot of DREs hit the market back then.
So when you were talking about a DRE and you said the ATM machine, a lot of people want that ticket to say, hey, I actually did this. Is that an option in DRE? Is there something they can print out so I know as a voter, I can walk away saying 05291 is my number, I know I did something on that machine?
No, you can't. By law, you can't remove anything from the polling place in Texas. So while the technology may allow to print a receipt, you still wouldn't be able to take it or do anything with it. I think
I get my number when I vote now.
Right, but you can't take it out of the polling place. You can't take the ballot with you, in essence.
No, the number that you plug in. They give me a number.
Oh, okay, that's just a way to determine what to put on the screen
Right,
for you.
yeah,
Right.
so-
That you would still get, because that's the check-in process. It's separate from the voting. So you would still go through a process of checking in on an electronic poll book, get a little paper that says you get to vote on ballot number style 1046.
Okay.
That's put on the screen for you. Now, when you finish voting, whatever you voted is not documented in any kind of paper trail. That receipt just says that we gave you that you were supposed to be given, or that you were given ballot type X that has the races you're entitled to vote for.
So in DRE, would we get the same thing?
You don't get that from the equipment, is what I'm saying. You get it from the check-in station, which is the electronic poll book we're looking to use in the future. Now, because I like to be clear on the possibilities, DREs may produce a paper trail.
Okay.
Even if they did, even if we found equipment that did, there are two things to keep in mind. One, you can't take it out of the polling place. You would have to have some sort of a ballot box to leave it there. But two, you don't have a chance to correct it or do anything with it. It's a committed transaction, it's a counted vote. And a lot of people will challenge, then what's the point of having a paper trail if you can't verify, that the system recorded your vote the way you did? What if, and this is the argument you may hear out, what's the point of having a paper that says this is a vote for Hyder if I as a voter can't say, well, I didn't vote for Hyder? So that's where the hybrid solution adds value into. If you want to have a paper trail that allows you to verify, as a voter, you can take some action if you disagree with what's on that ballot before you count it. That's a huge point of discussion for people who are pro one or the other.
When the court discussed this, one of the questions was, if we simply use the DRE that we have right now and tell it to print out who we voted for, and it goes ahead and casts the ballot, and we've got this paper receipt, then we can't walk out with it, so we've got to shred it before we leave. And we just foresee that that's going to end up creating issues, because there are going to be people who are going to say, it's my ballot, by gosh, I'm taking it with me.
Absolutely.
And we have to explain to them that no, by state law you can't, and I can just see that that's not going to be a decision that they're going to, or a point that they're going to like. So the court leaned toward, okay, so we're going to get a piece of equipment that will print out a ballot that's marked. Everybody will have an opportunity to look at that ballot that's marked. And then they'll know that they've got to put it in a machine, therefore they don't have anything they can carry with them at that point in time. But they have been able to validate that that ballot marked the people that they wanted to vote for, or the propositions that they wanted to vote for.
Which is the hybrid.
Which is, that's the hybrid. Now, the other thing, so what we kind of looked at and what we're seeking input on is that right now we have two companies that have equipment. They may not have certified equipment yet, and there's a possibility that there may be a third company that prior to the end of September, which is coming up pretty quick, or by the time that we have to put out an RFP, that they'll have certified equipment. And so when we put out this RFP, then what we could say is we want a DRE that produces a ballot that we then put into a machine. And so when you fill out your RFP and your quote and your bid, then that's the equipment we want for you to bid on. And in the meantime, we may say, and oh, by the way, we want you to be present on this day to demonstrate that equipment, and invite as many people as might want to come and to look at the equipment on that particular day. But then they would submit something that will later then be evaluated by the committee.
Correct.
And then the committee would ultimately end up making a recommendation to the court for
So
its approval.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The state of Texas only says there's only so many vendors that can come in the state of Texas?
That are certified. Anybody?
And we can only use certified vendors?
Correct.
So we're bound by that law?
Yep.
Okay. So
Yes,
if we're
ma'am.
bound by
Sorry.
that law, would it, I mean, the RFP and getting in front of vendors, and, I mean, I know that's, something Jack goes crazy about. Could we not, Hyder, just have a committee set up, and then those that have certification voting machines come before our committees and say, hey, this is what we offer, and whatever's out there in the world of certified vendors in the state of Texas, we get to see, feel, touch, see what it is, and then the RFP process does take a long time and nothing happens quickly. If other certified vendors are on there, do you see what I'm saying, Judge?
Yeah, but when what we're talking about doing, we did get Jack to agree that we could go direct buy, which means that it'll be off of the state contract. And the state will have the certified equipment on that contract. So we should be able to simply go to the vendors who have the certified equipment based upon what we're looking for and say, bring it here, let us look at it, and then submit a bid.
Right.
Our specs at what we would be
Or
looking.
will tell us what we know we can buy it off the state contract, and are they willing to make any variation off that?
We know that it's certified for purposes of use by counties is one thing, but do we know that this is an item on the state contract?
Jack indicated
Did
that it
Bob
was.
find that it was? Okay, good.
I think.
Of course, I think right now, if we technically look at it, right now, there's one certified
Hybrid.
equipment that will fit the parameters of, it'll spit out a ballot that we then put in a scanner. And we would prefer to wait until we have at least two
Okay.
and maybe three.
We do definitely want a competitive process. I would say whether under the procedure of the RFP or under the more direct process of buying through state contract, we definitely are going to go through putting together a committee, getting input, evaluating, and going through a lot of parameters. I guess to answer your question, I would rather first ask DA's office and Jack, purchasing agent, on Is there any legality that we are overlooking if we go direct to the contractor? Is there any other consideration we should be including to have a final answer in that? But either way, I'm preparing for specs written, team together, full evaluation, score everything as much as we can, and try to include, besides the public opinion on the voting experience, the poll workers' experience. I mean, for us, it's important to understand how difficult or how easy we're going to make the process at the polls, the whole preparation of the ballots, the back-end design, voting by mail, mass processing. I mean, there are a lot of back-end considerations that I also need to include in that evaluation.
So if you buy off a state contract, you write your specs, your RFP and your specs, and you can simply just contact a state contract and vendor and just bypass Jack altogether?
My general understanding is the answer is yes, because you're buying off a
Because, I mean, I
contract that
can't
allows you
even
to
look at a
just go.
vendor.
Yep.
I mean, I cannot even look at a vendor if I'm in a spec process, RFP process.
My understanding is that's correct.
Okay.
Well, we could buy off the state contract. Now, that doesn't mean Jack's department won't be a part of that process.
Exactly.
But we can buy off of a state contract, or we can enter into an interlocal agreement and buy off of a county. We do it all. We have interlocal agreements with over probably 800 different municipalities and counties and other governmental entities, and they buy off the contract without coming through us.
Yeah, but the deal is that the only individual or department within the county that can make the acquisitions, regardless if it's an RFP or just simply buying off DIR or the buy board, is going to be the purchasing department. That by statute 262 clearly defines that. So the purchasing department is going to have to be involved in that. Now, that's not going to slow down any of the things that you're trying to do. You just need to make sure Jack is included.
Correct.
And he becomes the lead in this thing.
And he will set the parameters of, when we say we have our committee now and we want to see machines, he's going to be able to say, this is a competitive process, even if it is on DIR. You have vendors that are trying to land a big contract. So he's going to set up how that works. And I would think that, hey, Hyder, you can't call Joe,
Right.
hybrid, and you ignore this guy.
Right. And I think
If it is on the state contract, it's my understanding, all we have to do is say to Jack, that's the equipment we're buying, make arrangements, buy that much equipment, and there's nothing competitive about it. We've made the decision, we're gonna buy off that
Yeah,
contract.
the only thing that purchasing would do is if the same piece of equipment is provided by two vendors, and then he would probably want to ask if he would negotiate for us to get us the best deal.
Well, but the same piece of equipment is not gonna be provided by two vendors because each one of them created their own equipment.
That's driven by the specifications. If the specifications are identical and the equipment does exactly what the specifications require, then you basically have two competitive deals. But you don't have to go out on what everyone considers an RFP. The judge is right, we can buy directly off that without going through a competitive bid. Purchasing has historically, if they provide the same piece of equipment, then you ask for the best price. That's it.
I understand the spirit of the RFP process is to open it up to everybody has the same opportunity to get the contract. The difference in this particular scenario is that not everybody can get it. It has to be one of the two or three that have the state certification.
Right.
So one way or another, we definitely have to take the time to evaluate each of the options and come up with which is the one that fits the county the best in terms of, again, like I said, what the voters like, what every stakeholder has to say about it, et cetera. Now, whether at the end of that process we say we have concluded one way or another from the evaluation that this is what we want, go buy board, or we wrap that up in an RFP, that's where I would like to get more of a concrete opinion from Jack and DA's office, just to make sure that if we decided to go direct, because it saves time, because you don't have to publish an RFP for 2 or 3 weeks, you can just call the vendors and have them here next week demonstrating, for example, doesn't cause any issues from a legal point of view. But ultimately, I think we're clear on we want as many options on the table as we possibly can. I think it's in the best interest of the county, of the money we're going to spend and the voters we're going to serve to have options on the table, and that's where we're trying to go with this.
And so setting up this group of advisory, creation of the Citizen Advisory Committee, what is the objective and their intent at the end of the day in relationship to the Commissioners Court, who ultimately makes the decision?
Right. So do we have questions on the equipment? Because the Citizens Advisory Committee was, it's a point that we're bringing up for vote centers, not for equipment.
Got it. So they
So-
have nothing to do with this discussion.
They have nothing to do with this discussion, that's correct. The Citizens Advisory Committee is something that has been shaped in other counties who have implemented the countywide polling place program, the vote centers program. No requirement on having public input for buying equipment exists in the law, so.
So the commissioners are really not looking for any public input on whether it's a hybrid or a DRE.
No, I would not say that. What I would say is that we will ask the vendors to bring in the equipment. At the time that equipment is brought in, we will encourage there to be people from the various parties to be a part of looking at that equipment and giving any comments or thoughts that they have. It has been suggested to me that we bring in seniors. It's been suggested to me that we bring in people with disabilities and at least seek their comments or their thoughts with regards to the equipment. Again, remember, I think what the court has said, and we've not had tremendous pushback from anybody when we've commented, and I haven't heard tremendous pushback today, is I think what the court has said was we're interested in a type of machine that will produce a ballot that's already been marked, that the individual will have an opportunity to review that ballot. If they have a problem, then they go to the election judge and they say, we got a problem, this ballot needs to be destroyed and we need to get another one. And at the point in time that they feel comfortable with the ballot that they've looked at, then they will scan it into the machine and it's done.
Correct. That was the same impression I had last week when I walked out of court.
And so that can involve, the way you make the selections, all of that stuff, and that's what we will ask the vendors to come out and show us equipment that will do that, and then we will ask for input from people who've tried it out and said, this one seems to be a lot easier and more understandable than this one. They both bring out a ballot, the ballot ultimately gets scanned, but one is just much more simple to understand and to operate.
Correct.
And we'll also ask the judges and the people who are working the polling, we'll try to have hopefully we'll be able to get a good cross-section of people who will come in and at least have an opportunity to play with the machines and get a sense of how that would work.
Have we ever, I know there's many voters in my precinct that I've worked as a precinct chair that wait till election day to do that paper ballot. And if they don't have that, they're going to be disenfranchised to some extent because they don't have faith in the machine recording exactly the way they voted, and it wouldn't be available for a recount. So that's why I would go for the hybrid, so that they can at least look at a piece of paper. And it doesn't mean they would have to print out a paper ballot. If they decided that what they saw on the screen was what they wanted, they could say cast without paper or cast with paper.
I think with the hybrid, they will be forced.
Always have to have a paper.
They'll be forced to print out.
Right. It won't count until you scan it.
But there was a number of people who complained at the last time that they felt like that they were hitting one and that they ended up voting for Hillary versus voting for Trump. Well, there wouldn't be no question in their mind as to who they voted for.
Well, yeah, I mean, even the one we have now gives you the whole list at the end, what you voted for, but they don't scan all the way down it.
Yeah.
The option, and sometimes with the machine, if they dial, move the dial just a little bit, it changes their vote.
Yeah.
And they
So-
didn't realize it when they did it.
Right, and an example, it's going away after this November, but straight party voting, I understand, confuses people because you choose, it pre-marks all the options, and then you can go change a few things, and then they're not sure whether they were able to cast a full party or they changed something. This will give you that chance with the paper, and that's why I put those second chance in
Right.
quotes there, to look at the paper and say, nothing's going to change because I misused the screen. This is what's going to be counted, and there's a paper. So that's where it opens up that. But everybody needs to have a paper trail because
Everybody
anything you
can
do
get
on
one
screen
vote, yeah.
does not exist. It's not a vote until you scan that ballot in the hybrid model.
I'm hearing the same thing you are, judges. There's no pushback that
Yeah.
hybrid is the way to go.
So that's kind of the direction we'll move from this standpoint.
Okay. So I take that from here that we keep moving for the hybrid solution, and now we look for procurement process. So nothing more on the screen for me, but I'll still stay here. More comfortable this way. So we want to talk now about the Vote Centers program. Okay, the Vote Centers program is something that I brought up to Commissioner's Court some time ago, saying the law allows us to participate in the county-wide polling place program. We talked about this one time here, voting anywhere on election day in any location that's open, not just your precinct.
Can I back up?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, Judge. I have a question. I'm just trying to process.
Absolutely.
So in the hybrid, when you get the ballot, you put it in the box, what happens to the ballot? It stays in the
It's in the box.
It's dropped in the
Recounted.
ballot box,
In the case
just
of
like it's-
recount, you now have, in the past, we had no, I mean, basically, there wasn't a change, but there wasn't a recount. Because, well, there wasn't a recount for early voting.
Exactly.
Because those were all done on the DRE machines, and once that ballot is cast, you have no way of going back and validating it. This way, there will be a piece of paper for every vote that is placed. And so, if there's asked for a recount, they'll take those paper ballots out and they'll recount every one of those paper ballots.
I think the strength of the hybrid is that before each ballot is put into the ballot box, it's validated by each voter. And the electronic, anybody who wants to question it can still say, well, how do you know that's what I recorded? How do you know that the screen didn't show one thing and create a different record? This one breaks them apart and says, you grabbed the paper, you read it, and then you chose to put it in a scanner, and I can't change the paper. So it gives it the validation of everybody who participated. That's the argument that pro-paper trail and hybrids will bring up.
That's
And
a
there will
great
be
notion.
enough testing done to make sure that when here's a ballot, here's the way it's cast, that it cast the vote for everybody based upon the way the paper was done. Now, there'll still be a recount, but I mean, at the same time, there'll also be a reconciliation of where maybe for whatever reason, and I don't know what it could be, but maybe you stuck a ballot in there and for some reason the machine didn't scan it. It's in there. At the end of the day, it should show a problem in the reconciliation.
Correct.
You know, we know we had 100 ballots, but the machine's only saying we got 99.
There you go.
Correct. We actually had a case like that in ULIS, in the library. They had a malfunction with the scanner, and the ballot box has two compartments. So when the scanner is down, you put them in a side compartment, and when you get the replacement, you're supposed to pull those out and scan them and catch up. And they said, we mixed up. We don't know what happened. Our numbers are not balancing. We had to rescan the entire box that night when it came back. So that's a scenario that can still happen. There's no doubt about
Now
that.
you've got a paper ballot.
But you have a paper ballot to go back on. But what you won't have is we had 100 papers go through the scanner and somehow we have 99 votes, or they're distributed different, or
That's better than having 100 paper go through and you got 105 votes.
right. So you don't have that with the hybrid.
So in the hybrid machine, it drops into the paper is in that machine, then just what happens after that? What's the
It's just
rest of
like
it?
a regular scanner you have right now. The scanner is lying on top of a ballot box, and after scanning it, it just drops it in the ballot box. So at
And
the
then
end of the
who's
day,
responsible for the ballot box and the paper?
the poll workers seal it at the end of the night and deliver it to us sealed, just like they do now. That really doesn't change at all from what we do now.
Really, the only change that this going to this hybrid machine will mean is that right now, anybody who votes early votes totally electronic,
Correct.
and once they hit that cast ballot button, the vote is cast, but there is nothing. There is no paper trail that proves up the ballot to the vote count.
Correct. That matches your choices on
There's no
screen
way
to the
prove it out.
record.
So anytime you're recounting early voting, you're never going to get a change.
Correct. And I expect that basically to happen with the hybrid, because you get rid of the hand-marked ballots.
Well, I
But you
understand
have the
that, but
blessing of the
you've got
voter.
something.
Correct. You have the blessing of the voter on the paper trail, which you don't have on the electronic trace of the DRE, and that's the fundamental difference.
Okay.
Well, does the hybrid, when you cast your vote on the machine before you print it out, Will it keep the vote count that's on that ballot as well? And then when they scan it, it's counted on the scanner, and then you can actually compare the two at the end of the day and say these should be identical.
Now that's the kind of question we start asking when we look at specific implementations by each vendor. The concept they all have is make your choices, pre-mark your ballot, then scan it after you've validated what's on it.
Yeah, but
Now, how they do that?
My initial thought on that would be no, because if I print out a ballot,
well, you want to validate the scanner is scanned your votes as they were cast.
not necessarily, but here's the deal. If I print out a ballot from the scanner, that ballot's not cast. It no longer casts, it just prints my ballot.
Correct.
Right.
And if I decide that, no, wait a minute, something's wrong on here, then I want that ballot destroyed, and I want to see that ballot destroyed. So you can't be running a count over here on the deal because you don't know how to go back into that machine and identify a ballot to kill.
Well, you'd have to record the serial number of the ballot you're destroying, like
I said, we'd have to look at what the vendors offer
Well,
and
we
what the
just need-
procedures
yeah,
are.
that'd be one of the questions, I
But
guess.
I know that we could, and just throwing ideas out here, at least have counters, and then on the electronic poll book we have how many you spoil and how many were check-ins, and you could balance. I mean, there are many ways to get to that, but we have to see once we have them in front of us. That's the kind of evaluation that I say goes
Good point.
beyond the voter's experience, and we will consider in how does this help us run the polling place and catch inconsistencies to audit and do extensive, research in
Because
certain
even in
places.
paper ballot now, if they mark a ballot and overvote and then they scan it and this rejects it, you got to destroy
You
that
spoil it
ballot.
and you get a new
spoil the
one,
ballot,
correct.
you record the serial number on
Right.
it, and then you issue another paper ballot to them. But
And when we did the pilot of the electronic poll books in Keller and Azle on September 8, we were able to track the spoils and balance out. We gave you, 500, and you gave me back a printout that says 100 votes, and you gave me 395 ballots back. Oh, hold on, you spoiled 5. There they are, and we found them on the envelope. So it helps us track and balance. So it depends on what vendor you choose and how far you want to go with. Do you want to spoil a specific ballot or just work with quantities and see how it all integrates with the other technology we have, the electronic poll books, the voter reg system, et cetera, et
And so
cetera.
right now, how many certified vendors are hybrid voting solutions?
Well, my understanding is there's only one that has a solution already certified, and there is at least one, if not two, that have already applied and are in the process of certifying. So next step, having the general feedback that hybrid is the way to go, is to now contact the state and say, what's the timeline here and what are we looking at? My uninformed guess officially at this point would be, I don't think we're going to make it to May, just because we would still have to review everything, get all the evaluations together, see when those vendors would get certified to have more options on the table. Let me confirm that with a state timeline.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
So, vote centers, going back to vote centers. To be able to participate in the vote centers program, the law requires, in this context, 2 items related to public participation. One is public comment session in Commissioner's Court. And that would be done almost at the end of the process if we came up with a plan that we feel comfortable enough to present to the court. But it also talks about taking public input and proving to the state when you turn in an application to participate in the program that you've taken public input. And it's not very detailed on how to take that input. So what I've seen other counties do is create committees, and I took the name from Fort Bend's experience, the Citizens Advisory Committee, to shape that form of input required and be able to then tell the state when you apply for the program, this is how we collected public input. So the discussion around how the CAC is basically for me was to present to you an option of how to conform it. And then obviously I would take it to court and say, here's my proposal for taking another step and moving forward and possibly implementing vote centers is appoint a CAC, and here's a suggestion. So the idea is to create a committee where we would have 5 members appointed, 1 by each member of the Commissioner's Court, 2 by each party, and myself. That makes 10. And so we would have party representation, court appointees, and the elections administration, obviously, looking out for our operation and everything that we consider from our end. if we are able to get that, I'd love to hear your feedback on it. I can bring it to court 2 weeks from now, and move forward from there. I would love to get this done in October. I still have to talk to the state, but if we can put the CAC in place, and the timeline, obviously, with the equipment, which is required to go to vote centers, does not get to May, to me, it would be a great experience for the CAC to have some sort of observation of the election in November before they go into discussing, possible implementation of locations and vote centers and those kinds of things. So that's the only point on the CAC. I don't know if there are any comments or suggestions on how we could conform that committee.
Just a couple of other things with regards to the vote centers. As we discussed that with the Commissioner's Court, Commissioner Brooks was, he was concerned about all the people who he believes walks to the polling place. But one of the things that Hyder, we had, well, how many polling places did we just approve?
338.
338. The last meeting where we discussed this a little bit amongst ourselves here, there's a couple of things. By state law, you cannot reduce, the first time you go to a vote center, you cannot be below 60% of what you had in the previous, I guess, similar election.
Correct.
So it would be 60% of the 300, or if it was
202
300.
or 3.
If it was just 300, that's an easy number, then we couldn't, the last time we used easy numbers, it got us in trouble. So I'll go 400.
Okay.
And say that 60% would have been 240. I think Deborah expressed concern that we would go all the way to that 60 to begin with, and she suggested that it might be a gradual decrease. Travis County, when they went to vote centers, did not reduce their polling places one iota. One of the things that Hyder suggested as a possibility that we might look, if we were to go to vote centers, that at a minimum, we might eliminate those polling locations that were in public schools. Because there is an issue, some of the public schools are not excited about having strangers walking in and out of their campus on election day, or any day for that matter, but especially on election day. And in the May municipal, or in one of the runoffs, I think it was actually when they were doing their tests, which made it even more stressful.
Correct.
From their standpoint.
Yeah,
So-
I do take a lot of calls from schools.
So
saying-
that's one of the things. But I know that the devil would be in the detail as to determining what polling places they would be, but it would prevent people from ending up in one polling place and being told, well, you're in the wrong place, and you got 5 minutes to get across town. Or, I can't tell you how many people would come up to the Northeast Subcourthouse and say, well, I voted here on election day all
Yeah.
my life, and we ain't never had an election day polling place in that place. So,
Euless Library is saying, well, I've always voted here.
well, no, you hadn't, but they're not willing, they don't want to listen to that day. So that's the beauty of the deal, plus you can, it will mean that we have to have more machines. They still will not be in any way connected to the internet. Our poll books, our electronic poll books are connected because it is a matter of being able to immediately know that I have voted at one of the locations. So that if I decide I'm gonna immediately go from there and go vote in another location, well, that ain't gonna work too well. So but those do not involve cast votes. Now, yeah, I guess you could hack in and I guess you could erase the fact that I've been there, but somewhere or another, that's gonna eventually show up because the books are gonna, it will record that.
And tell me again, the voting centers, what's the benefit of having voting centers?
Convenience for voters. The main one is convenience for voters. You can go
voting,
anywhere.
the
I can,
actual-
Right.
yeah, I can vote anywhere in this county
Actual election.
that I
On
want.
election day, exactly. It's the way we have phrased it to make the explanation simpler one sentences like early voting on election day. You can go anywhere. And if you go for the reduction in the locations, there are obviously operational and financial
The one question that
benefits
was
to it.
raised at the meeting by Stephanie Click at Republican headquarters was the fact that when you get to the end of the day and you have to print out a tape, and I don't know if that's what the new machines will do or not, how that's gonna work, but you now have to print out a tape that would show every precinct within the county.
Every option and every precinct.
And so her comment was, at some of these places, it might take days to print out the tape. And so obviously, there's gonna have to be
Upgrade.
there's gonna have to be something that's going to prevent that from having to happen. But Lubbock County has already gone to it, and I'm not implying, but Travis County has too.
They got it waived by the Secretary of State, and I reached out to Fort Bend, and they are not printing them either. So that's an interesting question to ask when we look at the equipment.
Yeah.
How is this problem being solved? And to keep polling other counties who are doing vote centers to understand, how are you printing the results at the end of the night?
Yeah, the concept is great, the results may be,
So under that scenario, if they're not, it's a matter of how do we get those recaps to the central location so that we can post some results before 3 days later.
Correct.
Or, in time. We already have a pretty big lag. And I just don't know whether or not, I think it would have to be something that the election board probably, or maybe it would be the commissioner's court, or maybe it would be the parties that would say, we're okay with the machine showing you the results, tabulating the summary results without printing out any kind of a tape that would be in some way or another sent electronically to the headquarters, and then that total would be used to do that. And remember, none of that will have occurred till after voting is closed, so it won't influence anything, but it could potentially create a problem that might be corrected after all of the hardware comes in and is plugged in and recounts everything. But that's gonna be another question we need to ask the vendor. How do we do that, and what protections do we have from that standpoint?
So let me ask you this, when you're looking at vote centers, are you looking at vote centers for early election and election day, or just popping them up on election day?
It's just election day, because early voting it already offers the benefits that this program is trying to give us for election day, which is you can go to anywhere in the county.
So we will look to keeping 338 on early voting.
No, we have 49. We just approved
Yeah.
49.
I'm sorry. So
49,
49 on early voting.
Right.
Anywhere you want to vote, just show up and.
Right. There's no reduction in early voting is, I guess, the point,
So
yeah.
then here we come election day, and that's where we start getting the rub, saying we want to add voting centers where you can have that convenience to vote anywhere
Correct.
if you want. But you still have to, if you're not going to a voting center, you still have to go to your correct.
You don't have traditional polling places. Basically,
Ouch.
every location that we set up as a polling place can allow anyone to vote on election day. So there is no one type or the other.
You will not have a polling center that is only for a precinct.
Exactly.
Every machine will have every polling place will have a machine that can give you a ballot for every precinct
Correct.
within the county.
And that's, to connect to the previous conversation, that was part of the motivation in my guessing for the state legislature to put in the law. You need a DRE if you want to go to vote centers, because you have to have the possibility of creating any possible ballot in any possible location.
So now I'm totally confused.
is there a plan or a
Let
thought
me-
process because I like the voting center thought process, but is standing up voting centers on election day but keeping the traditional precincts there because it's either or kind of thing, where it's an overlay where we transition a transitional type of plan?
That's a little bit of the approach that Travis County took, and I'm going to go there to ask me questions. Travis County said every polling place is a vote center.
Okay.
We're not shutting down any.
Okay.
So you can still go to the school you used to go, but everybody else can go to the school you used to go. And you can
what
also go to
happened
another
was-
place, and everybody else can go there. So they didn't change the locations of the places. They just allowed anybody to go anywhere.
And what type of voting machine do you need for that?
One of these two,
One of
either a
these two?
DRE or a
Go
hybrid.
back to the hybrid. See, that's the whole thing, is that when you go to the voting centers, you go away from, there's no longer gonna be a ballot that you're gonna get that you mark.
That's right.
Pre-printed ballot.
A blank pre-printed ballot, right?
Yeah, and so it's gonna be, you're gonna vote on a piece of equipment, it's gonna spit out, according to what we've suggested that we want, it's gonna spit out a ballot that's then going to be scanned into a machine, but nobody will walk in and say, I don't trust that machine, I wanna see a paper ballot. There won't be paper ballots at that point. It will be generated off of a piece of equipment.
Right.
And as we've indicated thus far, it will then generate a paper ballot. You'll look at it. Yes, this is the way I wanted to vote. You'll walk it over to a piece of equipment. You'll stick it in there and it'll be scanned in. So the only difference, I mean, if we have just as many polling places as we currently have, then it will still be just a matter that no longer will you be able to take your pencil or your pen and fill in a ballot. It'll be done for you on a machine.
Right now, the moment you register, based on your address, we know what precinct you're in. And then when we bring to the court for approval the polling places, we know where you're going to vote.
Yep.
And we print a paper book for election day, early voting I'm completely leaving aside, where you're listed somewhere. So when you get there and you show your ID, they find you on the book, and if you're in that list, you vote here, and if not, you either have to be sent to your polling place or you have to vote a provisional. What changes is that book is gone. You now have an electronic poll book, and you're listed, if you want to think about it that way, you're listed everywhere. Anywhere you show up, we're going to find your record and say, okay, and now we know what ballot type we should give you.
Okay.
Because even though you're coming to vote in Arlington, you live in Keller, we're going to give you the Keller ballot. That's why you need the DRE, to be able to, on the fly, create any type of ballot and give you the right one, even though you're not in the geographical location where you're voting.
Let me ask you a question. I am a registered voter in Tarrant County, and I live in Hurst.
Okay.
And the day before the municipal election, I moved to Euless. Is there any residency requirement for me to vote in Euless?
You vote at the polling place you're registered.
But that's not, I mean,
And
here's my question
you-
though. If
I wanna-
I now give you my address, and that's my new address.
Correct. But when-
So I'm entitled to vote in Euless at that point in time, I think.
No,
30 days. isn't it?
no, you're not. You're entitled to vote, that's what I was trying to get at the polling place where you were registered on the cutoff date, and only for the jurisdictions that you still live in. So the example I always give is if you move within Fort Worth, but you switch from Keller to Fort Worth ISD, you can vote in Fort Worth and the city council because you still live in Fort Worth, but you can't vote. You have to go to Keller where you were registered on the cutoff date, but you won't be able to,
And the cutoff date is 30 days
30
prior to
days
the-
before the
So
election.
that means if I move on the 31st day before,
29. Okay, sorry, let me, not
31st. If I'm on the 29th, I'm out of luck.
exactly.
If I move on the 31st and I tell you that I've moved on the 31st, then I'm okay. I'm assuming that if I don't tell you, even though I moved on the 31st day, I will not be eligible to vote because I haven't notified you.
By telling me, you mean re-registering? Do you mean
That's
tell the
what I
poll
have to
worker?
do.
Right. If you're re-registered, obviously there's no problem. If you show up on election day and you tell the poll worker you don't live at the address you're registered at anymore, you are not to be allowed to vote in the jurisdictions you do not live in anymore. Only the ones that you still live in, according to the registration you had on the cutoff.
From what you're saying, I gotta get my registration changed.
Yes, that's why
And
it's,
you will get it all done
right,
on that 31st day.
Correct.
If I come in and tell you on the 31st day, or maybe even on the 30th day,
correct,
you'll get all those done in time for
correct.
early voting. And so it's 30 days probably prior to early voting.
That's
Correct.
correct. I didn't mean to jump out there and say that. That's what I've always understood.
How do you have a piece of equipment if you, for example, if you live inside the city limits of Fort Worth, and, but you move from one ISD to the other, you can only vote for the area that you currently work in or live in. Do any of these machines have the capability of creating that type of ballot?
That's one thing that we will be looking at, which one would make our life easier. What we have to do right now, because we don't have the technology to solve that problem, is that person has to cast a provisional. And when we get it back, we say, okay, you voted a ballot that had Fort Worth and Keller ISD, but you don't live in Keller ISD anymore. So we grab a blank ballot of the same type and duplicate the Fort Worth ballot and scan that one, and not the Keller, because you were not entitled to vote on Keller. And that's the same procedure we use for overseas ballots when they come in, because people print them at home on their scanners and you can't put that in. So we use that same regulated procedure of duplicating them to be able to make sure that because one way or another, if we don't let you vote, we're disenfranchising you. And if we let you vote the full ballot, we're allowing you to vote in a district in which you don't live, which is also illegal. So there's no real other way to do it. When we get the new equipment, hopefully, let's see if anybody has a solution that helps us partially count provisionals or deal with that kind of thing.
So voting centers you want on election days, your suggestion is to keep all of our polling places open and just letting,
Nope.
you don't want to do that?
Not my suggestion. I obviously, from an operational point of view, would like to reduce as much as possible, but I obviously understand that I need to take feedback from, the.
I don't think we'll be at 100%, but I likewise don't think we'll be at 60. I think
Okay.
we'll be somewhere maybe around 80. And that eventually we can never get below 50.
Never.
And so, it's somewhere between 100 and 50. And my guess is the first couple of years, it's gonna be the higher percentages. And as people get used to it, and as we're able to gauge where there's high volume and where there's not, then that will be where we can eliminate some. But the idea of maybe first rattle out of the box, we eliminate schools, and then if a school was a particularly high volume, then we may go out and try to find another business or church or something else to do in that area, but we may very well get out of and that was one of the comments that Commissioner Brooks made, is that, if schools, if there was a particular, school in a neighborhood that people were walking to, well, maybe we find a church. I wished I could be convinced that there's a lot of people getting out and walking, but I'm not altogether convinced that's happening.
Well, I know that, like Euless Library has always been used for early voting, and then election day voting, it's only for the precinct that it's located in. And, as an election judge there, I've turned away probably 60%, 70% of the voters to go vote somewhere else because it's an early voting location. And so I know those will be the high volume places on election day.
And some of those 60% go
Right.
vote to the other place, and some of them just get mad and go home.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Well, you're just denying me my right to vote, is what they say,
And in the long run, one thing that we would try to look for is having consistency. I mean, if people don't have to think where to go, they know. I always go to that grocery store near my house, and it's always a polling place, regardless of what. I don't have to find out. I don't have to check. I just go, show up, vote, and that helps eliminating this. So it's not as easy, depending on what type of election. The county sets the locations, the entities do. But if we start finding high density points, I think we can, build a mindset in people that it doesn't matter what type of election, that one's always open. I just go there and I don't have to worry about it. So that's where I would, see some value to this. Hopefully translate it into higher turnout in future elections.
So how do we get more hotels to open their lobbies up to vote? I mean, we do use the Candlewood Suites a lot.
Yeah.
But, I don't know how many other hotels have done that, but.
That's an idea.
That is a
So,
great idea.
and so I remember when you did your presentation, you stuck something in somebody's corridor or something, and
Yeah.
so I guess my question is, how do you go about when you go to the vote center? How are you going to look at the different precincts and say, you know what, in this particular precinct, there's low voting. It really makes sense to just cut out those and, leave this area up. I mean, how are you going to do that?
Right. What I've done since that first presentation now, I've worked with my staff, the GIS team, in preparing data on age of the population in every precinct. So it's broken down by blocks, 18 to 25, 25, 45, so on. Party turnout, minority population according to census data. Polling places, we have added data on how close they are to bus stops if you're in Fort Worth, things like that. I just want I want my role to be in that CAC of the data person.
Okay.
Okay, so my approach is, look, if you have to choose between these two, guess what? This one's closer to the bus stop. The voters are older. Looks like a better candidate to keep, right? So it's just a data-driven approach.
Okay.
And hopefully, if we find discussions within it, it'll be like, okay, what data will help settle this? That'll be my role, hopefully.
And so back to the Citizens Advisory Committee, what is their objective and intent with this in relation to what the Commissioner Court ultimately says?
Right. The way this whole thing plays out in the end is I have to bring a plan to Commissioner's Court to approve.
Okay,
And I want to be able to tell the court, we involved all the committee that you created for me. We took their feedback and we came up with this plan. And so hopefully that plan will have a lot of weight behind it to tell the court, yep, the people that made up the committee agreed on this list of locations. And so it's not Hyder woke up one day and chose 200 random. It's, your appointees, the parties, and the elections administration agreed on this list of locations as a plan for vote centers. That's the definition of the goal we want to get to. How that happens, that will be the dynamic of the CAC. Obviously, we will have discussions, and I think we should drop this one. I think we should keep it. How do we find an agreement on that and come to something we can present to court?
and so currently, right now, y'all are looking at the Commissioner Court selects how many people?
One per person,
One per member. And then the parties,
2 each.
2 each. So that's 9.
That's
Well, does that
9.
include the Libertarian and Green Party?
No.
or no, okay. Just,
Not planning to.
so you have 2.1 million citizens, and we're gonna have 9 people on this committee.
10.
10. So can I make a suggestion that the
Absolutely.
members on the commission and the board be able to select somebody within the community as well?
I mean, I don't care. mean,
I don't
it's
see why
fine.
not.
Again, it's something we're required, we will have a town hall meeting, we'll have a public meeting at the court. So, I mean, that's fine, I don't have a problem with that.
I'm
Yeah,
okay.
or you just go to all the precincts, just have town hall meetings and,
Yeah,
No,
obviously,
he's, in addition to we have to have a public hearing here in the Commissioner's
Right,
Court.
right.
Required to have one of
Right.
those. And then I think we were thinking about town hall meetings in each of the precincts.
perfect.
yeah, obviously, at some point, it would be beneficial, again, to get make a stronger case for Commissioner's Court when we go there to say, we went to each precinct or we had these meetings and we showed them the potential list of places, we took feedback and we adjusted, and so we believe this satisfies or addresses the concerns of the community. So definitely, that would be a step that doesn't exclude the discussion of the committee.
And for my purposes, I have no problem with, I don't want 3 appointments. I'll appoint one person. Because if we do it by committee too, then I've got this commission, I've got the board, I've got the commission, and I've got the court. I don't want 3.
Yeah.
So I would just say, the parties give us 2 each, the court members will do 1 each, you'll be on there, and then, if, you and the tax assessor collector, each one will appoint 1, more power to them. And then that way we got 13, I guess.
Sure. Again, and it's important, this committee is a mechanism, it's not regulated in any way. So we will have to,
It's just required by state law.
it's required to, we have to have a way to tell the state that we took input. And so it's going to be, we need to work together, it doesn't vote in any official matters, everything's gonna come to court in the end. So it's just, we need to come up with a plan that we feel comfortable enough bringing to the court. Yeah, obviously I don't want 50 people in the committee, but I don't think that having 3 more is gonna,
And statutorily, what you're trying to do is generate documentation that lists the steps taken to solicit input on participating in the program by organizations or individuals who represent the interested voter. That's what the whole point
Correct.
of that is. So it's a mechanism by which you do that. And so the committee that is formed, go out in the community, but also send letters, for instance, to different organizations. Hey, we're having public hearings on this. You're an organization that represents the interest of voters. If you wanna come and be heard, here's when we're gonna do it.
Right.
And so that you do it in writing, you generate more documentation, you have them come in, there's somebody takes down notes of the committee, so you've got documentation of that. It's a really broad language. The best way to approach it is a local thing, it's left to the locals, but that's the goal, that's what we're trying to do, is to document that, so.
So,
I think that you've done a great job of looking into the future, and you've got a strong footprint moving forward for a good strategic plan in the future.
thank you. So we'll work on that, a proposal for the Commissioners Court to create a CAC, probably some charter document
And
specifying
I'll
what they'll do, all
take
that.
to them the desire to make it 13 instead of 10, and we can kind of go from there. But I try to go ahead and get your names lined up pretty quick. And the only reason we didn't make it the party chairs is because with the party chairs
Yeah.
and him, y'all got a quorum every time you get together, and we can't do that. So, that's why if you'll just go ahead and give us, if each one of y'all will give us 2 names and not include yourself, then,
And I think the other message is, obviously, this topic will pick up as we move forward. People will want to join the committee after it's created. That's just a fact. That's just what happens. It doesn't mean they can't come in and sit with the committee in the sessions. They're going to be ideally open. So we're going to discuss the southwest, southeast, northeast, northwest quadrant of the county this week. People who live there, people who want to talk about it, the school districts there can send their people and say, here's what we think about it. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're not, on the contrary. That's the point of creating the committee, to call them in and say, have your say right now so we can factor it in our discussion.
And how is there already a thought as you go out to those quadrants? How do you tell people that you're there?
Oh, that was just a brainstorming. I think the first session of the CAC is, how are we going to do this? We have to, and that's another item in the law, we have to create a methodology until the state.
Okay.
We didn't just randomly flip coins. We had a method. This is how we scored them. This is how we approach it. This is how we evaluate it. So I think the first meeting of the CAC would be, how do we approach this? How do you think we can get to that conclusion?
We tell each one of the parties to broadcast it out. I mean, again, depending upon how, well, and again, this is more along the lines of the vote centers, and that whole discussion along the lines of the vote center as opposed to, so I mean, it could be executive committee. I think that the bigger message is going to be when we have those vendors in, it would be very good if, whether we do each vendor on one day,
Okay.
and then we get the word out that says, if you're interested in coming in and looking at the equipment, we get it out to the seniors, we get it out to the disabled folks, we get it out to the parties, we get it out to everybody, and then just say, the machines are gonna be here, come on down.
I talked to my staff a little bit about this. One thing we would like to do, like we did with the electronic poll books, is to create a framework for those demos and say, we want to see this election happening, so you can compare apples to apples. And so you don't have a vendor who comes in with a ballot with 3 races and one with 300, and you're not really sure if
So give them a common ballot to
So we
program
say,
into one of the machines they
right.
bring.
Obviously, at some point, we'll discuss whether we just take the data from last November, this November, because it's a real case, but then you have ballots with real candidates going around for a demo. And so, but it's a real scenario. Or if we just grab all of those and
I really
replace,
think we ought to we ought to have a race of who's the most favorite Disney character. We
But-
have Goofy, Pluto.
Yeah. I would like to have one with at least, 12 races and 10 proposals like we have right now. That's a real scenario, not the data, but the scenario is what I'm looking. But that would be considered. So if we can do that, prep it, evaluate them internally. How long did it take to set up, to create, to configure, to design ballots, and then do, okay, now have the public come in and vote those ballots we created? That would be great for us.
So I have a question. You were talking about kind of a timeline that you were trying to get to. So your goal is to have this committee set up by what day? In front of the court?
October 2nd is 2 weeks from now. Doesn't sound unreasonable.
1 week.
It's next week.
Then what's 9th? Sorry.
So you would like to have everybody turn names in so you can get that presentation ready to give to the commission?
Right, now, whether, and we'll check the date, not promising it's the 9th. We obviously got to look at the calendar and make sure that it can be put on the agenda that day or a week later, but definitely in October, early enough if possible for them to observe the November election. I think that would be incredibly beneficial.
So you would want those potential 13 members to observe the November election?
I think it would be.
With you, just to see
Yeah.
how it runs and what's going
And
on?
even if we bring them in, come in one day and watch how we do the ballots by mail, and you
Okay.
understand the process, and you understand early voting and how this will, and then go on election day and see the difference and understand what this is about, and then start working on the locations and the feedback.
It's gonna have to be the 16th.
The 16th, okay, then the 16th. So if it's 3 weeks from now, I guess we could either have those names by then or just ask the court if they approve that in a vote to ask you for the names and send them to me.
And this CAC has nothing to do with your voting machines?
It's not mandated that it does, but I have a feeling that it will be a resource to tap into.
Okay. And you wanted to kind of push for the voting machines by a certain time? Were you pushing that a little?
I would rather have options on the table, make it a
Okay.
competitive process
Right.
than a date-driven one.
So you said earlier you were gonna try and find out when you thought the state was gonna certify those other ones, so I agree with you completely. Hyder, I mean, we've waited this long and we, taped and duct taped those machines long enough. I just
And we already
think,
paid the maintenance license for the
I
year.
just really think that, the citizens would be better served if there were 3 vendors that came in with a hybrid rather than just the one. So you're not looking to push this to say, hey, we just need to get these new machines.
Correct.
Okay, then I think that's a great idea. We've
Which-
waited this long, let's
which
get all the
inher-
vendors, we may find a better one out
Right.
of the ones,
Which, and I just want to make sure that, because I've said this on the past in other meetings, I had the intent of completing the purchasing by the end of the year, and that May would have been the first one with the new equipment. But given, the scenario that we're looking at a not so competitive process, then I would rather have a more competitive process. I think in the long run, it's going to be better for Tarrant County to have more options,
Commissioners would enjoy
even if we have
looking
to
at 3
wait
rather
one
than
more election. But let's wait for the timelines and see
Yeah.
what's on the table.
Well, I would hope they would, wanna look at multiple vendors rather than just the one that's been here,
Yeah,
the hybrid.
that's what I have in mind at least, yeah.
Okay, I was just curious what your thoughts were.
So I guess I go back up there now.
Thank you.
Any other questions or any other comments at this point in time from our election commission? There being none, then the election commission is adjourned.